Snow has been falling over the cave mouth for 3 days straight. Inside, 12 people take turns feeding a single fire through the night, because when that fire goes out in an Ice Age winter, it doesn't feel like an emergency, it just feels like sleep. It is roughly 20,000 years ago, somewhere in the hills of what is now southwestern Europe. Ice Age hunter-gatherers, communities that will vanish from the record so completely that scholars will spend centuries arguing over what to even call them, are living through one of the coldest stretches of the coldest era their world will ever produce. Ice sheets bury most of the continent to the north. Sea levels sit more than 100 meters lower than they do today. This corner of the world is a refuge, milder and wetter than the frozen steppe further east, which is the only reason a 3-day snowstorm like this one is survivable at all. Further inland, this air would be dry and merciless. Here, there is at least shelter. 12 of them. Not a village, nowhere near it. In deep winter, groups this size splinter off from larger bands. Small enough to move fast, small enough to live off whatever a handful of hunters can carry in through the storm. 12 will sound small, said out loud, centuries from now. It will not feel small to the people huddled around this fire tonight, because 12 is every person they have. The wind has a particular sound when it hits a cave mouth at this angle, a long, low pull, like breath drawn through a gap in the teeth, rising and falling for hours without ever quite stopping. Nobody inside has slept a full night in 3 days. They have slept in pieces, the way you learn to when a fire needs watching. The cave itself is not what the movies will one day imagine. No torchlit tunnel stretching into blackness, no paintings glowing on the walls just past where everyone sleeps. This is a rock shelter, camped at the mouth. Open enough for smoke to escape and dawn light to reach the back wall, closed enough to break the worst of the wind. Whatever happens deeper inside caves like this one, and something clearly does, judging by the art some of their neighbors down toward the coast have been leaving on walls not so different from these, it isn't sleeping, eating, or keeping 12 people alive through a blizzard. That happens here at the edge of the light. The hearth itself is nothing more than a shallow pit scraped into the cave floor, ash banked around its edges from nights before this one. No ring of stones, no engineering, just the same patch of ground, used and reused until the earth itself seems to remember where the fire goes. Into it goes wood, when there is wood to spare, and something that would surprise most people watching from 20,000 years in the future. Bone. Animal fat, rendered down inside marrow and cartilage, burns slow and hot, and out here, where trees thin out fast, a fire fed partly on bone can outlast one fed on wood alone. It is not glamorous. It is exactly the kind of unglamorous knowledge that keeps 12 people breathing until spring. Here is the part that is easy to get wrong. These people know perfectly well how to make fire from nothing. They carry flint, and somewhere among their tools, a lump of a mineral that throws sparks when struck the right way. A trick their ancestors have known for tens of thousands of years already, passed down so long that no one alive remembers a world without it. So this is not a story about people who don't know how to start a fire. It's the opposite. It's a story about why, even knowing how, you do not let this fire go out. Striking a spark into dry tinder is one thing on a still afternoon, with dry hands and dry kindling close by. Doing it at 2 in the morning, in a screaming wind, with every scrap of tinder within reach soaked through, is a different problem entirely. One that has killed people before, and will kill people again. Keeping an old fire alive through a bad night is, almost always, easier than making a new one. Everyone here understands that arithmetic without needing to be told. So someone is always awake. There's no record, no proof, that these particular people worked out formal shifts the way a modern camp might. But watch enough winters like this one, in enough cold places, among enough people who depend on a single flame to survive the night, and a pattern like this tends to appear on its own, learned the hard way and never spoken about directly. Tonight it's an old woman doing the watching first, her hands slower than they used to be but sure around the fire in a way that comes only from decades of exactly this. She feeds it in small amounts. Too much wood too fast wastes what little dry fuel remains, too little risks the flame guttering out between watches. She has done this more winters than anyone else in the cave has been alive. If the fire needs a decision made about it, in the dead of night, it gets made by her. Everyone else sleeps close together, which is not a detail added for warmth in the telling, it is the warmth. 10 or 11 bodies pressed into the same stretch of stone floor share heat the way nothing else available to them can. They are dressed for this. Not draped in loose hides the way people often imagine, but fitted clothing, sewn close to the body with needles carved from bone and antler, eyed at one end just like a needle today, small enough to thread with sinew and precise enough to close a seam against wind the way a wrapped skin never could. Someone in this group, maybe more than one, spent long winter evenings just like this one turning reindeer hide into something wearable. Trousers, sleeves, a hood pulled tight against the worst of the draft moving through the cave mouth. Reindeer are the animal this group knows best. Their meat fills the cold months, frozen solid and stacked somewhere just outside, needing no fire and no salt to keep through a winter this brutal. The cold itself is the only storage they need. Their hide becomes clothing. Their sinew becomes thread. Almost nothing about a reindeer goes to waste, because almost nothing here can afford to. Somewhere near the fire, half finished, lies a spear point struck from flint with a skill that will still be admired thousands of years later. Thin, leaf-shaped, shaped by pressing rather than striking, flake by careful flake, until the edge is sharp enough to open a reindeer's hide in a single motion. And leaning against the cave wall, still new enough that not everyone in the group fully trusts it yet, is something else. A length of wood and antler that lets a hunter throw a spear harder and farther than an arm alone ever could. It is the kind of tool that has only just begun appearing in places like this, new enough that the older hunters still favor the old way, young enough that in a few thousand years, no one will hunt any other way at all. Tonight, it just leans there. One more thing this group owns that their grandparents did not. A child stirs, presses closer to whoever is nearest. Someone in the group, it could be anyone, this close together, carries a small carved figure, worn smooth in places from being held, passed down through more winters than anyone bothers to count anymore. Nobody here could tell you exactly why it matters. It simply does the way objects handed down through a family always do, whether the year is 18,000 years before a calendar that doesn't exist yet, or is one being read off a phone screen right now. Outside, the wind changes pitch. For a moment the fire drops low enough that the old woman leans in fast, before anyone else even stirs, feeding it back to life with hands that know exactly how much it needs and no more. In the sudden flare of light, for a second, the whole cave mouth is visible at once, 12 shapes under hide and fur, the dark smear of the storm just past the entrance, the small orange world that is, right now, the only thing standing between all of them and the same cold that has already taken people this group once knew. This is the moment that matters more than any of the tools, more than the clothing, more than the meat frozen and waiting outside. Not the storm itself. Storms happen every winter, and these particular 12 people, or people enough like them, have survived enough of them by now to know the shape of a bad night. What matters is this. 12 people, packed into the mouth of a cave at the edge of the coldest stretch of the coldest era their world will ever know, trusting that whoever is awake right now will not let the one thing keeping them alive slip away while they sleep. By the third morning, the wind finally drops. Snow still covers everything outside the cave mouth, but the sky has cleared enough that pale light reaches all the way to the back wall for the first time in 3 days. The fire is still burning, smaller now, hungrier, but burning. Someone will need to go out today, storm or no storm, because 3 days without checking the frozen stores, without checking for tracks, without doing any of the 100 small things that keep 12 people fed, is already too many. Nobody alive today will ever know these people's names. No one will ever know if this exact storm happened, on this exact night, to this exact group of 12. What the evidence does show is this. In caves and rock shelters scattered across this same stretch of country, for thousands of years on either side of this one particular winter, people just like them did this same thing, over and over, storm after storm. Kept a fire alive through nights that would have killed them otherwise, slept close enough together to share warmth no single body could hold on its own, and woke up the next morning to do it again. That is not a small thing. 20,000 years later, on a night when the heating fails or the power goes out, most of us will still, on some level, understand exactly what that fire meant to them.